Hi there. In this screencast, we're going to look at how to customize the editing experience in CLion. So most of the settings in CLion can be found by going to the settings dialog. So here it is, and we'll begin our customization by choosing the kind of colors that I use to color the particular code elements and indeed general text elements. So for this purpose, we'll begin by going into Editor and then Colors and Fonts. And we'll go into font. So the default font is a pretty important setting. As you can see, we have no ability to change it here. And the reason for that is that by default, CLion comes with a set of predefined schemes that you can set. But if you want to customize this setting, you have to basically have your own scheme. So in my case, I have a scheme called My. And here I can change the primary font. I can change the size and the line spacing as well. And I can also change a couple of other settings. So if we go into general, you will see that the general settings here refer to things like what color would a hyperlink be. Now you can select each of the elements and have the preview window scroll to them, and as you select one, you can also make the selection by clicking right inside the preview window. So for example, I can click this hyperlink and I go to a followed hyperlink setting, and here I can customize the way it looks. So for example, I can switch off the background. Now as I change these settings, I immediately get a preview of what's actually been changed. And notice that it's not just the text elements that can be customized, it's also the gutter marks. So we have different gutter marks for things like, for example, the text search result or the to-do colors. And once again, you can click on it and you can actually give it a background, for example, or switch off the italic for the to-do elements. So these are general settings which apply to just about any file that you might be working on. So the question is, well, what about code elements? Well, at the top level, we have something called language defaults, and this contains some of the programming specific elements such as keywords, identifiers, strings, that sort of thing. And once again, you can either select them here or you can click on them, and then you can customize them by, for example, choosing your keywords to be italic if that's what you want. And these settings, they propagate to just about any language that you might be using, unless you customize it further by going into the language specific settings. So for example, I can pick the C and C++ settings, and here I can actually override the value. So as you can see, our setting here for keyword is to use bold and a specific foreground, but what we can do is we can avoid inheriting from the general default. So I can uncheck this box, and now I can customize the keyword styling specifically for C and C++ files. So for example, I can once again set it to italic, and that way I will be setting it for all C and C++ files, whereas other types of file would be using the settings that we've specified in language defaults. So these settings control the way text looks. What about the user interface? Well, for this, we can go up here and we can choose appearance, and we have another concept similar to the concept of schemes. We have a concept of themes, and at the moment we're using the IntelliJ theme, but I can switch it to a different theme like Darkular, for example. Now, as soon as I press apply here, a couple of things happen. It's not just the user interface that changes here, but the Darkular theme also has a related style for the code that appears below. And so if you look here, you will see that the code has been updated as well as obviously the UI. So this is how you can control the way that things appear depending on your preferences. So next up, let's talk about the code style settings. Now, the code style settings are once again per language, so there are different languages and different settings. So let's go with C and C++. So the idea here is that you can customize the way that code elements are actually laid out in a file, and we have a couple of settings here. Like for example, we have the setting for tabs and indents, and here I can start using the tab character instead of spaces. And notice the flashing here. This basically shows us which elements of the file that we're previewing actually get affected by our change of this tab character setting. We also have settings for spaces, so you can control where spaces appear and how many. We have settings for wrapping and braces, so for example, you can determine whether lambdas appear in one line or not. We have settings for blank lines, and finally we have some settings for code generation. So for example, if you want to generate your getters and setters for a particular field, you can specify the prefixes, so I can change put to set, for example, and it's also possible to modify the top level declarations order that will be used when rearranging the file and adding new elements. Next up, I want to show a couple of things right in the code. The first of these is folding. So as you scroll up and down, you will see that code elements have these strange chevrons to the left of them. So these have minus size on them. And if I click one of those, the whole element that's selected gets essentially folded into a single line. And of course, you press the plus button to unfold it. Another construct that might be very useful is this window on the left. This is the file structure window. Essentially, it is a hierarchical window showing the tree containing the namespaces and the types and the fields and so on. And you can also link it to your code both ways. So for example, if I go into this file and I actually click somewhere, you will see that the selection in the structure window gets updated accordingly. And similarly, I can go back here and I can start clicking on different elements in the file structure window, and the editing window actually scrolls and selects the appropriate element. So just a couple of other things that I want to show. The first of these is the terminal window, basically providing a command line interface. So for example, if I want a directory listing, I can type dir, press return, and here I have my listing. And we also have the CMake cache editor. So this lets us edit the values, such as, for example, changing this on value to off. But don't forget to apply the values after you've saved them. There is a button here for applying changes and reloading, so you have to press that to make sure that your settings are in fact being used. There's one final thing that I want to mention with regard to the settings for the different aspects of the editing experience, and that is the ability to import and export settings. So if you go into File, you will see options for importing and exporting settings. And if you go into Export, for example, you can specify what kind of settings you want to export. And basically all of them get packed into a jar file that you can subsequently import on a different machine, for example, and get your settings back quickly and easily. So these are some of the ways that you can customize your editing experience in CLion. To find out more and get a trial version, go to jetbrains.com/CLion. Thanks for watching.